Welcome viewer. To a time when childhood was brief, school was a blood sport and university involved more gang warfare than the average episode of Peaky Blinders. Today we dive into the medieval school system, or as I like to call it, how to break a child in 12 brutal steps. You see, in the Middle Ages, childhood lasted about as long as a wet fart in a thunderstorm. By 7, you could be tried for crimes. By 12, you were expected to get a job. By 14, you were either an apprentice, a monk, or halfway to being maimed in a tavern brawl. And toys? Oh, they had toys. Miniature jugs and puppets called poppets, rattles and spinning tops charmingly named scoparils, and a rocking toy bird with a tongue that popped in and out of its beak, like a medieval party trick but for toddlers. Imagine a child playing with that while mummy launders blood out of the family tunic. And if you were lucky, and by lucky I mean consigned to a life of Gregorian chanting and bowel-shrivelling silence, you'd be handed over to monks. Hair shaved, cloak removed and replaced with a cowl. "May the Lord strip you of the old man," they'd say. Lovely. This was usually done around the age of 5. Because if there's one thing the church loved more than penance, it was tiny, bald children reciting psalms in Latin they barely understood. Now for the real fun, schools. Some were established as early as the 7th century, and grammar, rhetoric and natural science were taught, which is to say they taught you how to conjugate Latin, write letters, and avoid going to hell for asking too many questions. By the 12th century, education exploded, like a badly bottled mead. Oxford became a centre of learning, and Cambridge was founded when a student at Oxford murdered a woman, and the town responded by hanging his roommates. Naturally, the other students decided they'd rather not be next, packed up and created another university. Because nothing says academic excellence quite like academic exile. Now, viewer, let's be clear. Medieval students weren't just reading books and attending lectures. They were starting riots. Northern students and southern students beat the crap out of each other regularly. Oxford students once pissed on Welsh scholars, made them kiss the spot and then slammed their heads into the gate. Because clearly international student diplomacy wasn't on the syllabus. And it wasn't just students versus students. In 1354, an argument over a pint turned into the Battle of Swindlestock Tavern. Scholars rang the university bell, townsfolk rang the church bell, and by the end, 2,000 pissed-off locals charged the students. Just a typical standard Tuesday night on campus. You studied grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, and followed by arithmetic, music, astronomy and geometry. All good and noble subjects. But lectures were held in churches, students lived in inns, and half the time lessons were interrupted by brawls, witchcraft, or people baptizing cats. Yes, cats. A student named Stokesley was caught baptizing a cat and practicing witchcraft, which, depending on your views, might just make him the first Dungeons and Dragons player in history. They also kept ferrets, sparrowhawks, and even weasels as pets. Or perhaps roommates. If you weren't scholarly material, you'd be shoved into an apprenticeship between 14 and 17. You'd spend 7 to 10 years learning a trade while getting beaten with a broom for breathing too loudly. Apprentices were notorious for violence and mischief, one of their favourite pastimes. Breaking doors with our heads. Yes, quite literally headbutting their way through life. The original LinkedIn skills endorsement, if you will. But not everyone advocated violence. Many educational manuals promoted gentle firmness, although how many people actually read those is debatable. But it wasn't all horror and head trauma. Medieval children engaged in a delightful game called penny prick, which involved shooting an arrow at a dangling coin. They also played chess, sometimes on circular boards, because why not? And eventually in the mid-15th century, playing cards arrived on the scene. Naturally, gambling followed, because nothing says childhood innocence like losing your lunch money on a roll of the dice. By the time Thomas More came along, he reckoned 3 out of 5 people could read, possibly just in London, but still. Literacy was rising faster than a friar's ale bill. With printing came handbills, posters and even libraries. By the end of the 15th century, towns like Manchester and Rotherham had their own free schools. Because nothing fuels the thirst for knowledge quite like realising that ignorance gets you flogged, stabbed or left in charge of a weasel. So viewer, what did we learn today? that childhood in medieval England was short, violent, and often conducted under the shadow of Latin grammar, flying arrows, and the occasional pissed-off ferret. That universities were forged not from scholarly ambition, but from homicide and hangings. And that, even in an age of brutality and birch sticks, the human instinct to play, to learn, and, above all, to argue, never really went away. And perhaps neither did the chaos. Did you spot the Easter egg? Comment below if you did. Follow for more history drenched in sarcasm and dread.